The billionaire CEO asked his quiet employee to be his fake boyfriend at the charity gala. Nobody saw it coming. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you will never miss any of our upcoming videos. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and it helps us continue bringing you heartfelt, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this one. Your support truly means more than words can express. Now, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Leave the name of your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character. The people who quietly change the world are almost never the ones standing in the spotlight. They are the ones everyone else forgets to notice. Every weekday morning, Miles Bennett arrived at Whitmore Global before most of the lights inside the towering Manhattan headquarters had even been switched on. He enjoyed those peaceful minutes before the elevators filled with hurried conversations and ringing phones. With a cup of black coffee in one hand and a leather notebook tucked beneath his arm, he walked through the lobby greeting the security guards, the custodians, and the reception staff by name. Those simple conversations mattered to him because his parents had taught him long ago that every person deserved the same respect regardless of their title. At 28 years old, Miles worked in the corporate communications department, where his responsibilities rarely attracted attention. He polished executive speeches, refined press releases, prepared internal newsletters, and quietly corrected mistakes before anyone else realized they existed. His work helped other people succeed, and he had grown comfortable with remaining invisible. Recognition had never been the reason he came to work each morning. He believed that doing the right thing still mattered even when nobody applauded. His co-workers appreciated him, although many misunderstood him. Some assumed he lacked ambition because he rarely competed for promotions. Others believed he simply preferred staying in the background. The truth was much simpler. Miles cared more about becoming a dependable person than an impressive one. While many employees hurried past one another without making eye contact, Miles held doors open, stayed late to help struggling teammates, remembered birthdays without reminders, and volunteered every spring with the company's scholarship mentorship program for first-generation college students. None of those actions appeared on annual performance reviews, yet they quietly shaped the culture around him. Several floors above, Adrian Whitmore carried a completely different kind of responsibility. As the billionaire chief executive officer of Whitmore Global, every decision he made affected thousands of employees, millions of dollars, and countless families who depended on the company. Financial magazines praised his intelligence. Business television admired his discipline. Investors trusted his judgment. Yet behind the tailored suits and polished interviews lived a man who often wondered whether extraordinary success had slowly replaced the ordinary happiness he once imagined for himself. Every day his calendar overflowed with meetings, negotiations, and public appearances, leaving little room for genuine human connection. Even surrounded by people, he frequently felt alone. Still, there was one employee he had quietly noticed during the past year. Adrian had never spoken to Miles beyond polite greetings, but he had observed enough to recognize something increasingly rare. He had seen Miles return a lost wallet without telling anyone, patiently help a nervous intern prepare for an important presentation, and personally thank the maintenance team after they stayed late before a company event. Those moments lasted only seconds, yet they revealed more about someone's character than any resume ever could. Adrian found himself paying attention whenever Miles happened to cross his path, not because Miles demanded attention, but because he never tried to earn it. Genuine kindness without expectation had become surprisingly uncommon inside the competitive corporate world. Meanwhile, Miles remained completely unaware that the company's chief executive officer had been quietly observing those ordinary acts from conference room windows and executive hallways. As far as he knew, he was simply another employee whose life followed the same comfortable routine every day. That routine changed forever just before lunchtime when a new email appeared in his inbox from the executive office. The message contained only one brief sentence. Mr. Whitmore would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you in his office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Miles stared at the screen in complete silence, unable to imagine what possible reason the most powerful man in the company could have for requesting a private meeting with someone almost nobody else ever noticed. Sometimes a single conversation asks more courage from us than an entire lifetime of ordinary decisions. Miles Bennett spent the next 2 hours trying to convince himself that the email from Adrian Whitmore had probably been sent by mistake. He reviewed every assignment he had completed during the past several weeks, searching for an overlooked error that might explain why the chief executive officer wanted to see him. Nothing came to mind. He had met every deadline, supported every project, and handled every responsibility with the same quiet professionalism that defined his work. Even so, uncertainty followed him until the moment he stepped onto the executive floor at exactly 2 o'clock. The atmosphere there felt entirely different from the rest of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, original artwork decorated the hallways, and conversations were replaced by a calm silence that reflected the pace of executive leadership rather than daily office life. Adrian's executive assistant welcomed Miles with a reassuring smile before opening the office door. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you," she said kindly. Miles thanked her and walked inside. Adrian stood near the windows instead of behind his desk, watching afternoon sunlight stretch across the city. When he turned around, there was no trace of the intimidating executive scene on magazine covers. Instead, his expression was calm, thoughtful, and unexpectedly approachable. "Thank you for coming, Miles," Adrian said. "Please make yourself comfortable." Rather than sitting behind the large desk that separated him from visitors, Adrian chose 2 chairs beside a small coffee table. He poured 2 glasses of water before taking his own seat. The gesture immediately transformed the meeting from something formal into something surprisingly personal. Adrian waited a moment before speaking again. "I imagine you have spent the last 2 hours wondering why I invited you here." Miles smiled nervously. "That would be an accurate description." Adrian allowed himself a quiet laugh. "Then I should not keep you guessing any longer." He folded his hands together before continuing. 3 evenings from now, Whitmore Global will host its annual charity gala. Every dollar raised supports scholarships, children's hospitals, and community education programs. Unfortunately, someone who was scheduled to accompany me informed me this morning that a serious family emergency will prevent them from attending. Miles nodded politely, still unsure how the situation involved him. Adrian continued, "Ordinarily, I would simply attend alone. However, the media has already announced that I would be arriving with a partner. If that changes suddenly, the attention will shift away from the charities and toward unnecessary speculation about my personal life. I do not want that to happen." The explanation sounded reasonable, but it still left Miles with more questions than answers. Adrian looked directly at him before carefully choosing his next words. "I would like to ask whether you would consider accompanying me to the gala." Miles blinked in surprise. Before he could respond, Adrian continued with complete honesty. "More specifically, I would like us to appear publicly as a couple for that one evening." The room became completely silent. Miles wondered whether he had misunderstood what he had just heard. Adrian remained perfectly composed, allowing him all the time he needed. Finally, Miles found his voice. "Why me?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Because I have spent the past year watching the way you treat people when you believe nobody important is paying attention. You show the same respect to interns, custodians, receptionists, and executives. You volunteer without asking for recognition. You make difficult days easier for people who cannot offer you anything in return. That kind of character cannot be rehearsed." Miles lowered his eyes, genuinely uncomfortable with praise. Adrian continued in the same calm voice. "Please understand that this is only a request. You owe me nothing. If your answer is no, I will thank you for listening, and nothing about your career here will ever change." For the first time since entering the office, Miles realized that the most powerful man in the company was not trying to persuade him. He was simply placing complete trust in his freedom to choose. The strongest relationships do not begin with perfect promises. They begin when 2 people choose to respect each other's freedom above everything else. Miles Bennett remained quiet for several long moments, carefully considering Adrian Whitmore's unexpected request. The silence inside the executive office felt thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the afternoon continued as thousands of people hurried through Manhattan without realizing that two strangers were about to make a decision that would quietly change both of their lives. Finally, Miles took a slow breath. "I still cannot understand why you chose me," he admitted honestly. "There are executives, friends, and people who know you far better than I do." Adrian nodded, as though he had expected the question. Instead of answering immediately, he stood and walked toward a nearby cabinet before returning with a slim navy folder. He placed it gently on the coffee table between them. "Before I explain," Adrian said calmly, "I would like you to read this first." Miles opened the folder, expecting pages of complicated legal language prepared by an expensive law firm. Instead, he found a brief agreement written in remarkably clear and respectful language. The document described only a temporary public arrangement for one evening at the charity gala. It included basic expectations regarding photographs, interviews, and media attention, but what impressed Miles most was everything the agreement refused to demand. One section clearly stated that either person could end the arrangement at any moment without explanation. Another confirmed that all interactions would remain entirely voluntary and respectful. There were no unreasonable obligations, no hidden conditions, and no language that placed one person above the other despite Adrian's position as chief executive officer. Miles slowly closed the folder and looked up. "This is much simpler than I expected." Adrian smiled slightly. "My attorneys prepared the first draft. I removed most of it." Miles looked surprised. Adrian continued, "Trust becomes impossible when paperwork tries to replace respect. I wanted an agreement that protected your comfort more than my reputation." Those words lingered quietly between them. Miles realized that Adrian had never once spoken as though he expected obedience simply because of his title. Every sentence had offered a choice rather than a command. "You truly expected me to refuse, did not you?" Miles asked. Adrian answered without hesitation. "I prepared myself for that possibility. If your answer is no, then I will find another solution. I would rather face uncomfortable headlines than ask someone to accept something against his wishes." For the first time since entering the office, Miles felt his uncertainty begin to fade. The conversation was no longer about pretending to be someone's partner. It was about whether he believed the man sitting across from him deserved his trust. Adrian reached for another folder resting beside him. This one contained photographs and information about the Whitmore Scholarship Foundation. "There is something else I wanted you to see," he said. "This year's gala will officially launch an expansion that will provide scholarships for first-generation college students across the country." Miles quietly turned the pages, recognizing several students he had mentored through the company's volunteer program. Adrian noticed the expression on his face. "I know you have volunteered every year," he said. "You never told anyone about it, but I noticed. Those students speak about you with enormous gratitude." Miles lowered his eyes, visibly moved. Years earlier, scholarships had allowed him to attend college when his own family could not afford tuition. Helping others had always been his way of honoring the people who had once believed in him. Suddenly, the invitation to the gala felt larger than a single evening. If appearing beside Adrian helped keep public attention focused on giving more young people that same opportunity, then perhaps accepting was worth stepping outside his comfort zone. After one final moment of reflection, Miles extended his hand across the table with a quiet smile. "I still think this is the most unexpected conversation I have ever had," he admitted. "But if this truly helps the students, then I would be honored to stand beside you." Adrian accepted the handshake with genuine gratitude, knowing that what had just begun as a simple agreement was already being built upon something far more enduring than appearances. One evening can change your reputation, but one sincere moment can change your entire heart. 3 days passed more quickly than either Adrian Whitmore or Miles Bennett expected. The communications team finalized the last promotional materials for the annual charity gala while volunteers prepared auction items, scholarship presentations, and fundraising exhibits that would welcome hundreds of guests from across the country. Although the event attracted influential business leaders, celebrities, and journalists every year, Adrian continued reminding every department that the evening was never supposed to celebrate wealth. Its purpose was to create opportunities for students whose dreams deserved a chance to become reality. On the evening of the gala, Miles stood quietly inside a private reception suite at one of Manhattan's most elegant historic hotels. He adjusted the sleeve of his tailored navy tuxedo for what felt like the 20th time, wondering whether anyone would notice that he had never attended an event like this before. His nervousness had very little to do with cameras or reporters. He worried about disappointing Adrian and unintentionally drawing attention away from the scholarship foundation they hoped to support. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Adrian entered wearing a classic black tuxedo that reflected confidence without unnecessary extravagance. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Adrian smiled warmly before saying, "You look exactly like yourself, and that is more than enough." Miles laughed quietly. "I was expecting advice about posture or smiling for photographs." Adrian shook his head. "The cameras can capture appearances. They cannot create authenticity. Just be yourself." Those simple words immediately eased much of Miles's anxiety. Moments later, an event coordinator informed them that the guests and media were waiting. As they approached the entrance, the sounds of conversation blended with the rapid clicking of cameras outside the ballroom doors. Miles instinctively slowed his pace. Adrian noticed and quietly offered his hand without saying a word. There was no pressure in the gesture, only reassurance. After a brief smile, Miles accepted. Together they stepped into the bright lights. Camera flashes illuminated the entrance while reporters politely called Adrian's name from behind velvet ropes. Curious whispers spread throughout the crowd as guests recognized the billionaire chief executive officer arriving beside an employee almost nobody outside Whitmore Global had ever seen before. Adrian greeted volunteers before greeting investors, thanked hospital representatives before speaking with television reporters, and repeatedly redirected every interview toward the Scholarship Foundation instead of himself. Watching him quietly reminded Miles that the kindness Adrian showed in private was exactly the same kindness he carried into public life. Later that evening, the opening ceremony began beneath sparkling chandeliers as hundreds of guests took their seats. Adrian walked onto the stage to introduce the expanded scholarship initiative, speaking not about financial success but about opportunity, responsibility, and believing in people before they believed in themselves. As his remarks came to a close, he paused and looked toward Miles, who remained quietly seated among the guests. "There is someone here tonight who represents the spirit of this foundation better than I ever could," Adrian said. "He reminds all of us that the greatest acts of leadership often happen when nobody is watching." The audience turned toward Miles as Adrian invited him onto the stage. Completely surprised, Miles slowly joined him beneath the warm lights. Adrian continued with genuine admiration. "This foundation exists because people choose kindness without expecting recognition. I have had the privilege of witnessing that kind of character inside my own company, and I believe we should celebrate it just as much as any financial achievement." A long round of heartfelt applause filled the ballroom. Miles felt overwhelmed, not because he enjoyed attention, but because someone had finally recognized the quiet values he had carried his entire life. Throughout the audience, guests raised their phones to capture the unexpected moment, unaware that those photographs would soon travel far beyond the ballroom and quietly begin changing both of their lives in ways neither man could possibly imagine. The hardest part about pretending is the moment when pretending quietly becomes the most honest thing you have ever felt. Monday morning arrived with a completely different atmosphere inside Whitmore Global. Photographs from the charity gala had spread across business magazines, nonprofit websites, and social media throughout the weekend. Journalists praised the record-breaking donations raised for the expanded Scholarship Foundation, while countless online discussions focused on the unexpected appearance of the company's billionaire chief executive officer beside the quiet employee almost nobody had recognized before that evening. Miles Bennett hoped the attention would disappear after a few days. Instead, co-workers greeted him with warm smiles as he walked through the lobby. The receptionist congratulated him on the success of the fundraising campaign. Several interns thanked him for speaking with them during the gala and making them feel welcome, despite the intimidating environment. Even employees from departments he had never visited before stopped to introduce themselves. Although the attention felt unfamiliar, Miles remained exactly the same person he had always been, quietly returning shopping carts in the parking garage, holding elevator doors for strangers, and thanking the custodial staff before beginning another ordinary workday. Shortly before noon, another message appeared in his inbox from Adrian Whitmore's executive assistant. "Mr. Whitmore would like to invite you to lunch if you are available." Miles stared at the message for a moment before smiling almost without realizing it. Their agreement had officially ended when the charity gala concluded. Adrian no longer had any reason to continue seeing him beyond ordinary workplace courtesy. Nevertheless, Miles accepted the invitation. Rather than choosing one of the exclusive restaurants where executives entertained investors, Adrian drove them to a quiet neighborhood cafe tucked beside a small independent bookstore several blocks away from the business district. The owner greeted Adrian by name and immediately asked whether he would like his usual tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwich. Miles looked at him with genuine surprise. "I thought someone in your position would spend every lunch at expensive restaurants." Adrian laughed softly. "Good conversations taste exactly the same no matter where they happen." The simple answer made Miles smile. Over lunch, they spoke very little about work. Instead, they discussed favorite novels, childhood memories, family traditions, road trips they hoped to take someday, and the simple comfort of watching rain fall against a window while reading a good book. Adrian listened far more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions and remembering even the smallest details Miles mentioned. For the first time, Miles stopped seeing the famous business leader described by financial magazines. He simply saw a man who had spent so much of his life carrying enormous responsibility that he had almost forgotten how peaceful ordinary conversations could feel. During the following weeks, one lunch quietly became another. Sometimes they visited small cafes. Sometimes they walked through Central Park carrying coffee while discussing life beyond boardrooms and deadlines. Other afternoons they volunteered together at the Scholarship Foundation, celebrating acceptance letters with students whose futures had changed because strangers believed in their potential. Watching Adrian patiently encourage nervous young people revealed a side of him that no television interview had ever shown. Adrian also noticed unexpected changes within himself. The pressure that usually followed him through every meeting seemed lighter whenever Miles was nearby. He began leaving the office before sunset simply because there was someone he genuinely wanted to spend time with. One evening, after they finished helping organize scholarship applications, Adrian looked toward Miles with quiet sincerity. "Our agreement ended weeks ago," he said gently. Miles nodded. Adrian smiled, his voice carrying none of the confidence that usually impressed investors. "Would you still have lunch with me next week if there were no agreement? No cameras and no expectations at all?" Miles looked into Adrian's hopeful eyes before realizing that somewhere between one unexpected evening and countless ordinary afternoons, neither of them had noticed the moment when obligation quietly gave way to something far more meaningful. Some truths are too quiet to be noticed until life gives them the perfect moment to be heard. Autumn gradually painted Central Park with shades of amber and crimson as the weeks slipped by almost unnoticed. The rhythm of Adrian Whitmore and Miles Bennett's lives settled into something neither of them had expected nor attempted to define. They never announced that they were spending more time together, yet everyone close to them quietly observed the difference. Adrian smiled more often during board meetings. Miles no longer rushed out of the office immediately after work because there was usually someone waiting to share dinner, a walk through the city, or simply an unhurried conversation over coffee. Nothing between them felt forced. Every moment seemed to grow naturally from the one before it. One Friday afternoon, after finishing a scholarship committee meeting, Adrian asked, "Would you like to get away from the city tomorrow?" Miles looked curious. "Where are we going?" Adrian smiled. "Somewhere that reminds me who I was before I became responsible for everything." The following morning they drove north for a little over 2 hours until Manhattan disappeared behind rolling hills and quiet country roads. Their destination was a modest lakeside house surrounded by towering maple trees, whose colorful leaves reflected across calm water. The house was comfortable rather than luxurious, with a weathered wooden porch, shelves filled with old books, and family photographs that revealed a version of Adrian very few people had ever seen. Miles slowly studied one photograph showing a teenage Adrian holding a fishing rod beside an older gentleman whose smile carried unmistakable warmth. "Your father?" he asked softly. Adrian nodded. This was his favorite place in the world. They spent the afternoon walking beside the lake, skipping stones across the water, and preparing a simple lunch together in the small kitchen. There were no assistants, no reporters, no board members, and no ringing phones. The quiet, allowed conversations that never seemed possible inside conference rooms. As the sun began lowering toward the horizon, Adrian and Miles settled onto an old wooden dock extending into the lake. Gentle ripples reflected the golden evening light while distant birds drifted across the peaceful sky. After several comfortable minutes of silence, Adrian finally spoke. "When I was 18, I told my father that I wanted to become the youngest billionaire in America." Miles smiled. "Did he congratulate you?" Adrian laughed quietly and shook his head. "Not exactly. He looked at me and said something I did not fully understand until many years later." Adrian looked across the water before repeating the words exactly as he remembered them. He said, "If becoming successful ever costs you the ability to recognize a genuinely good person, then you will become the poorest wealthy man in the country." Miles remained silent, allowing the words to settle between them. Adrian continued, his voice calm and sincere. "For years I thought success meant making the right investments. Then I met someone who reminded me that the greatest investment will always be choosing the right people." Miles lowered his eyes, visibly touched, unsure how to respond to such honesty. At that very moment, a middle-aged tourist walking along a nearby public trail noticed the beautiful sunset reflecting behind the dock. Without recognizing either of them, he paused to photograph the peaceful lakeside scenery. Adrian and Miles appeared only as two distant figures sitting side by side beneath the glowing autumn sky. The tourist smiled at the beautiful landscape before continuing his evening walk, never imagining that the simple photograph would later attract unexpected attention online. As darkness slowly settled over the lake, Adrian quietly broke the silence once more. "Thank you for reminding me that peace is still possible," he said. Miles smiled gently before answering with complete sincerity. "You helped me remember something too. Sometimes the people who carry the greatest responsibilities are simply waiting for someone to see the person behind the title." Neither man realized that the quiet afternoon they believed belonged only to them had just become the beginning of the greatest challenge their relationship would soon face. Reputation can be built over decades, yet a single unexpected truth will always reveal what kind of person you truly are. Nearly 3 weeks after their quiet weekend at the lakeside house, Adrian Whitmore arrived at headquarters earlier than usual. Before he reached the executive elevator, his communications director hurried across the lobby, holding a tablet with an expression Adrian had learned to recognize whenever an unexpected public relations challenge appeared. "You need to see this," she said quietly. On the screen was the photograph taken by the anonymous tourist at the lake. The peaceful image of two men sitting side by side on a wooden dock beneath brilliant autumn trees had spread rapidly after a popular travel photography account shared it as an example of quiet American landscapes. At first, nobody recognized the figures. Then someone identified Adrian. Within hours, online discussions connected the photograph with the charity gala. Several weeks earlier, journalists began asking whether the relationship presented at the fundraiser had continued beyond the event. Adrian remained calm as he studied the screen. "Has anyone contacted Miles?" he asked immediately. "Several reporters have already tried," the communications director admitted. Adrian's expression became serious. "Make certain our security team keeps every reporter away from him while he is at work. He never asked for this attention." Upstairs, Miles had already noticed coworkers whispering as he entered the communications department. Nobody treated him with disrespect. In fact, most people seemed more concerned about his privacy than curious about the growing headlines. Even so, the unexpected attention unsettled him. Shortly before lunch, Adrian appeared outside his office instead of requesting another formal meeting. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. Together they crossed a quiet courtyard behind company headquarters, where the sounds of Manhattan traffic softened beneath rows of changing trees. Adrian stopped beside a small fountain before speaking. "I am sorry," he said sincerely. "None of this should have reached your everyday life." Miles looked at him with quiet understanding. "Neither of us invited strangers to speculate about us." Adrian nodded. "The board will meet tomorrow morning. They will probably recommend that I release a statement describing everything that happened at the gala as nothing more than a temporary arrangement." Miles lowered his eyes for a moment. He understood exactly why such advice would seem reasonable from a business perspective. "You should do whatever protects the company," he answered honestly. Adrian remained silent before asking one gentle question. "Would that answer protect the truth?" Miles looked back at him but could not immediately respond. The following morning, the board meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Several directors argued that complete transparency would end the rumors quickly, while others insisted that publicly describing the gala arrangement as strictly professional would reassure investors who disliked uncertainty. Adrian listened respectfully to every opinion before quietly standing to address the room. The original invitation to the charity gala was indeed based on a temporary agreement, he acknowledged. However, what happened after that evening cannot honestly be described by any contract. The room fell completely silent. Adrian continued with steady confidence. "Mr. Bennett and I became friends because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Over time, those feelings naturally became something more meaningful. I will not erase that truth simply because it is more convenient." News of Adrian's statement spread across business media before the meeting had even concluded. Later that afternoon, reporters gathered outside company headquarters hoping for additional comments. Adrian walked outside beside Miles, not because cameras were waiting, but because neither of them believed honesty should ever hide behind closed doors. Standing before the microphones, Adrian offered only one final sentence. "Character is measured by whether we tell the truth when the truth becomes expensive." As camera shutters echoed across the sidewalk, Miles quietly realized that the man beside him had just risked far more than his public image to protect the life they had begun building together. The greatest test of integrity is not whether success follows honesty, but whether honesty survives when success begins to disappear. The days following Adrian Whitmore's public statement became some of the most demanding of his career. Financial news programs debated his decision. Business analysts questioned whether personal transparency belonged in executive leadership, while others praised his willingness to speak with unusual honesty. Inside Whitmore Global, the atmosphere remained professional, but everyone understood that the company had entered a period of uncertainty. A major international acquisition that had been under negotiation for months was temporarily placed on hold after several investors requested additional time to evaluate future leadership stability. Although nobody blamed Adrian directly, the timing made the connection impossible to ignore. During one executive meeting, a senior advisor quietly suggested that Adrian could still release another statement emphasizing the professional nature of his relationship with Miles before public opinion settled permanently. Adrian listened respectfully before answering with the same calm confidence that had guided him throughout the crisis. "If I begin adjusting the truth every time circumstances become difficult," he said, "then every future statement I make will become less believable." No one argued with him after that. Meanwhile, Miles struggled with a different kind of burden. Watching Adrian carry the weight of public scrutiny left him wondering whether he had unintentionally become an obstacle in the life of someone who had spent years building an extraordinary company. One evening, after another long day of interviews and meetings, Miles invited Adrian to the small neighborhood cafe where they had shared their first lunch after the charity gala. The familiar owner greeted them with the same warm smile as always, treating them no differently than any other regular customers. That simple normalcy felt comforting. After they finished dinner, Miles quietly folded his hands around his coffee cup. "I need to ask you something," he said softly. Adrian immediately recognized the seriousness in his voice. "Anything?" Miles hesitated before continuing. "If walking away from me would remove all of this pressure from your company, would you do it?" Adrian looked at him for several silent seconds before answering. "No." The response came so naturally that it sounded less like a decision and more like a simple fact. Miles lowered his eyes. Even if it helped your career? Adrian gently shook his head. A career can always be rebuilt. Trust cannot. I spent years learning how to create successful businesses. Meeting you reminded me how to build an honest life. I refuse to exchange one for the other. Those words settled quietly between them, carrying more comfort than either of them expected. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began happening beyond the headlines. Thousands of people wrote letters to the Whitmore Scholarship Foundation describing how Adrian's honesty had inspired them to support organizations that invested in young people rather than focusing on public controversy. Alumni who had once received scholarships returned as donors. Small business owners contributed what they could. Teachers organized local fundraising events. Parents mailed handwritten notes thanking the foundation for reminding their children that kindness and integrity still mattered. By the end of the month, charitable donations had exceeded every previous fundraising record in the foundation's history. During a board meeting reviewing the latest financial reports, one director quietly smiled while studying the numbers. "The acquisition may be delayed," she observed, "but the foundation has never been stronger." Adrian looked through the window toward the city skyline before answering. Companies measure success in quarterly reports. Communities measure success in changed lives. Later that afternoon, he shared the updated scholarship figures with Miles, who stood speechless after reading the report. Adrian smiled gently. "Do you remember why you accepted my invitation to the gala?" Miles nodded. "Because I hoped more students would have the opportunities that changed my life." Adrian closed the folder with quiet satisfaction. Then, despite everything that has happened, we did not lose sight of the reason this journey began. In the end, that matters more than any headline ever could. Home is never defined by the place where life begins. Home is the place where someone quietly chooses you every single day. 1 year passed with a steadiness that neither Adrian Whitmore nor Miles Bennett would have believed possible during the uncertainty of the previous autumn. Whitmore Global continued growing under Adrian's leadership. The delayed acquisition was eventually completed after months of careful negotiations, and the Scholarship Foundation reached more students than anyone had imagined when the Charity Gala first inspired a new chapter in its history. Hundreds of young men and women across the country received opportunities that allowed them to attend colleges and universities their families had once believed were beyond reach. Every acceptance letter reminded Adrian and Miles that one honest decision had created consequences, far greater than either of them could have measured at the time. Although newspapers eventually turned their attention toward newer stories, the people whose lives had been touched by the foundation never forgot the example that honesty and compassion could exist beside success. Adrian remained one of the country's most respected business leaders, but those who worked closely with him noticed a different kind of achievement. His office door remained open more often. He spent less time chasing impossible perfection and more time mentoring young employees beginning their careers. Board meetings still focused on financial results, yet they also included conversations about employee well-being, community partnerships, and long-term opportunities that extended beyond quarterly reports. Miles continued working in corporate communications because he genuinely loved helping people tell meaningful stories. He never accepted special treatment because of his relationship with Adrian, and Adrian never allowed their personal lives to influence professional decisions. Their mutual respect became one of the strongest examples of leadership inside the company. On a cool Saturday afternoon in early October, Adrian invited Miles to take another drive north. The familiar roads gradually replaced city traffic with colorful forests until they arrived once again at the quiet lakeside house where so many important conversations had begun. The maple trees had once again turned brilliant shades of red and gold, reflecting across the calm water exactly as they had 1 year earlier. They walked together to the old wooden dock without speaking, allowing the peaceful silence to welcome them home. Adrian reached into the pocket of his jacket and removed a small brass key attached to a weathered wooden keychain. He placed it gently into Miles's hand. Miles looked down in confusion before raising his eyes. "What is this?" Adrian smiled with quiet warmth. My father left this place to me because he believed every family deserves a place where life can slow down long enough for people to remember what truly matters. I have realized that I do not want this house to belong to only one person anymore. Miles looked at the key resting in his palm, momentarily unable to speak. Adrian continued gently. This is not an expensive gift. It is an invitation. I hope that every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary weekend, and every difficult season still to come will lead us back here together. I want this place to become our home, not because of the building itself, but because you are here. Tears quietly filled Miles's eyes as he closed his hand around the key. 1 year ago, I believed I was agreeing to help you through one evening, he said softly. Adrian smiled. And somehow you ended up changing my entire life. They sat together on the edge of the dock as the afternoon sunlight shimmered across the peaceful lake. In the distance, a group of scholarship students laughed while preparing canoes for a weekend leadership retreat sponsored by the foundation, completely unaware that the two men watching them had helped make those opportunities possible. Adrian gently rested his hand beside Miles's, and after a quiet moment Miles intertwined their fingers with a smile that carried complete certainty. Neither of them needed promises anymore because every ordinary day had already become proof of everything they had chosen to build together. As the golden light settled across the water and autumn leaves drifted gently through the cool afternoon air, both men understood that the greatest success either of them would ever achieve had never appeared on a balance sheet, a magazine cover, or a business award. It had quietly begun the moment one overlooked employee accepted an unexpected invitation, and it had grown into a life where kindness, honesty, and love became the only legacy that truly mattered.